So let me get to the speaker today. So Elizabeth Goodman is this really amazing sort of researcher and humanist and technologist who comes to us with a broad range of backgrounds and disciplines. She started actually with her BA in art from Yale. She went on to NYU, the ITP program there, the Interactive Telecommunications program, where she worked with a lot of really great and outstanding people and did some of her own projects that were extremely amazing and graduated from that. During that time, I had the fortune to work with her during my time at Intel Research. She came and we did some projects together, which coincidentally ends up being some of my most cited work personally. So some of that work I'm really proud of that I got a chance to work with her on. Then she did some work in industry research at Intel. She also worked with Fuji Xerox and Yahoo. She returned to Berkeley, as people like myself do too. She got her PhD here in the Information School, where she did a lot of really interesting work where she looks at technology. She has really well-versed in social practices and art, and you'll see that come out in her work. She has published a number of books. So one of them is she's co-authored about observing the user experience, which we use in a lot of the curriculum here at Berkeley, and also this whole concept of Internet of Things. She's another book called Designing Connected Products, which talks and addresses lots of the technical challenges and social challenges around adoption. And you can find all of the stuff as well at confectious.net. That's her homepage. And what she's done now is she's gone off to an agency where she's an innovation specialist called 18F. And this is part of the actual GSA, which for those of you who remember, this is the kind of General Services Administration. Is that right? Yeah. So the thing is, their motto for this program is to create great services for the public. And I think it's great. I feel I sleep a little better at night knowing that Elizabeth Goodman is there kind of leading the charge, bringing in sort of the right questions to them. And she's going to tell us a lot about that work and how she brings and bears and draws on her experience from all these other disciplines into her work at 18F. So, Elizabeth?
Wow, thanks so much for that introduction, Eric. I kind of want to see myself talk now. I'm really, really happy to be back here. I spent a lot of really formative years here, and I hope that the influence of the faculty and my fellow grad students here shows in this work. That being said, I'm going to be talking at breakneck speed because, like usual, I got really enthusiastic and had a bunch of things that I wanted to talk about. And I decided that I would shove them all in and we could address them in questions. So without further ado, I'm going to talk about what is 18F. And no, it's not alcohol, tobacco, or firearms, or fighter jets. Although once we did work with a guy who flew F-18s, and we were so excited for the palindromes. I'm also going to talk about why a group like this actually has to exist. I'm going to talk about how we work and how that ties into our mission, our purpose in life. Tell you a little bit about, more specifically, what we do. And then I'm also going to talk about what we're learning from a research perspective. And hopefully this is where I can kind of popcorn out a bunch of research questions and thoughts that occupy my time and that I hope will inspire you to think more about technology and the government as a site of research, investigation, and practice. So first off, this is us, as we were last fall. There are bonus points if you can spot me in there. I'm hiding. And this is a pretty rare gathering for us because we mostly work remotely, and I'll talk about that later. So you can see, though, my valued colleagues being held up on various devices so that they are there in JPEG, if not in person. What we are, more specifically, is a consultancy for the government inside the government. this turns out to be a pretty important place to be if you want to create tools and services that are easy to use, cost efficient, and reusable. This, by the way, does not say anything about serving the public, but it's a major factor in why we exist and how we work. In order to serve the public, we cannot solely be public-facing. We also have to think about what we're offering to our partners throughout the government as well. And that's a big part of what we do. More concretely, here's a bunch of our projects. We've done work for USCIS. Is there anyone who's dealt with USCIS and immigration in here? Great, we're trying to make that better. We really are. We also develop shared platforms like analytics.usa.gov, which gives you a live view of who's on government websites right now. And in a more fun project than I think we had ever done before, we also helped the Park Service get every kid in a park, which entailed writing an entire website at the 4th grade level. The important point I want to make here is that in these projects, there's no meaningful separation between law and technology. So if you'll often see at places like Berkeley or elsewhere courses that say something like law and technology, the Center for Law and Technology, the Center for Policy and Technology. And I see why that is, but it helps to remember that there is no point in my day when I am not thinking about some form of governmental regulatory action, whether it's formal law, policy, regulation, or even the informal practices that we call blue laws, the laws that exist because they are believed to exist and may not actually be anywhere to be found in the legal code. So the images I showed you back here are the most visible face of what we do, but there's an entire world of policy, legal, and business expertise backing us up that has to back those sites up. In the end, our goal is to transform building, buying, and sharing of digital services. So we're lawyers, contracting specialists, what my coworker Stephanie calls full stack bureaucrats, because she is one, as well as engineers and designers and researchers and writers and all of the other things that you might think of a design and development agency being made up of. We change the rules because we work through and with the law by working with the rules. That's how we play the game. So Eric mentioned this, and just to be clear, how many people have heard of the US Digital Service? Awesome, okay, a few people. So AT&F is one group that is in the General Services Administration. The United States Digital Service is another group that is run from the White House. I realize that this is slightly inside baseball. I had a whole long bit about how these two organizations are different and how they're the same, but I don't think you actually care. I just want to mention this because it turns out to really affect what and how we at AT&F work. We provide services generally across the administration, but we're not actually an arm of the political branch of the White House. So we exist because, as a country, the process that we've concocted to build and buy new things is supposed to ensure quality. It's supposed to reduce the risk that the thing we're buying is the wrong thing or from companies that are going to cheat us. And the way we set out to reduce this risk was the classic Waterfall Model. We would specify exactly what we wanted in excruciating detail before it was built, before even sometimes it was bought, where the services to build it were bought. Then we would go out and buy those services, and somebody would make them, and then everybody would be happy, and all the little line items would be checked, and everything would do exactly what it was supposed to do. As examples of mistakes, misappropriations, perhaps malfeasances grew up, rules came about to make sure that those mistakes never happened again. Time passed, the rules did what rules extruded into bureaucracies do, which is to multiply, accrue more specificity, demand documentation, warn off unwary people that they are not to be touched, and then technology practices become reshaped around those rules. And in turn, the rules become the practice. The people then cement rules into policy sometimes, or law. And eventually, you need to be an expert on the rules as well as an expert on the thing that you were actually supposed to be an expert on in the first place, which is why many government vendors have to have a full-time person who only deals with government rulemaking. Meanwhile, a new path emerged by which companies in the private sector could build new things. The path involves talking to people, having conversations, making a simple thing to test your initial hypothesis, and then testing it, and then doing that again and again. This is sometimes called agile development, but for simplicity's sake, let's just call it the new thing, the new way of doing things. But in the federal government, the old way, the way, has been cemented into place. It's been buttressed up with lots and lots of forms you have to fill out and processes you need to follow. It can't flex. So the old way and the new way need to be brought together in some way so that we can actually help the government serve the public without forgetting the lessons and values that led to those rules in the first place. And that's what we do now. So here's our theory of change. And because I'm a recovering academic, whenever I see anything titled a theory of, I go, ooh, where does this theory come from? Who is it meaningful to? Change for whom? And I can go into those potential research questions in more detail, and I will. But for now, let's just say that this theory structures how we work. That culture change happens through changes in practices, not through imposition from above. And so we make change by demonstrating that it is possible to play with and through the rules without being stifled by them, and that in doing so, you can be successful. Your work can be successful. You won't get fired. Sometimes we do this by shipping code. Sometimes it's by rejiggering a contracting process. And the corollary in there, of course, is that we can't dig ourselves out from this mountain of rules by telling other people to do it for us. We have to start. So that's what we do. It's very straightforward. We deliver. We make things. So let's talk about how that works. This would be introducing the inclusive and participatory part. So once again, I'm not going to get too hung up on terminology, but this is how we begin to facilitate participation. We build Agile, which is to say, we build, evaluate, repeat. We do this very quickly, and our goal is to fail small. And you know, the federal government is not known for failing small. And so that is perhaps the hardest thing that we do, is getting people to be okay with the reality of failing small when the hypothetical fail big is A, really likely if you don't fail small, but seems very far away and unlikely. Everybody wants to believe that healthcare.gov is going to work out this time. And so one of the ways that we fail small, of course, is by doing these very small tasks and by exposing them to the public. So this is the Trello board for one of our actual projects. It's public. It's for the EPA. It's the EPA e-manifest. That is, I'm sorry, a very, very long Trello link up in the right-hand corner. I will attempt to, hopefully you'll get this presentation and you'll just be able to click on the link. But if you went there right now, you would see it being updated in real time. We do this form of Agile, public Agile, because, once again, thinking about failing big, we often say that we're building the plane as we fly it. We don't want to crash it. We have no legal or ethical right to crash the EPA. if we are working with a mountain of institutional rules, arrangements, technologies, contracts, we can't just wipe them away and start from scratch. Instead, we have to step by step begin reassembling and reshaping them. One of the ways we do this is, as I said, we work open by default. This is one of our many, many, many GitHub repos. If you go to github.com/18f, you will see a massive list of them. And 99% of them are public. You can read what we're up to, you can continue, you can contribute, you can tell us we're all wrong. Note, by the way, that as a federal employee, I am not allowed to officially endorse any product. So I'm not endorsing GitHub. I'm just telling you that we use it. There's a lot of different other products we use. See what I mean about law and policy coming in all the time when I work? But open source, obviously, and openness isn't just GitHub, right? It's meaning that we invite people to these repos. We try not to just put a repo out there and let it be passively findable in the world. We try to, as one of my colleagues say, aggressively overshare. It's taxpayer money, after all. And we deserve to be made accountable for it. So there's a lot of blog posts, there's a lot of tweeting, it's a little bit of overhead, but that's, at least for the moment, the way we found to make open not just a default for nobody's seen it yet. The other thing I want to point out is, and I'll talk about this more in terms of participation later, that we're a distributed team. So the name 18F comes from the intersection we're at in DC, 18th and F Street. It is the most insidery, obscure piece of Washington, D.C. trivia you can imagine. It means absolutely nothing to the vast majority of my colleagues who live and work in Austin, Boston, Chicago, Dayton, Denver, Los Angeles, New York, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Portland. You get the point. This is how my day is spent. This is the reality of working on a distributed team. Is lots and lots of meetings like this. But that's how we like it, because it means that we can invite people to work from us from anywhere. So let me walk you through, very quickly, 3 projects that I think demonstrate how we go about being agile and open and making that a way of making change. So this is our website that we made for the FEC. You can go to it right now, beta.fec.gov. Can anyone tell me what stage of work this website is at? It's beta. Yes, thank you. It is a work in progress. And that's what I want to highlight, is that the point here is not that it's a pretty-looking website, although it is a pretty-looking website. It is that we convinced the FEC, the Federal Elections Commission, to put out an unfinished site and make it very, very clear that they're going to update it, they're going to work it out as they go. We started, by the way, with the Exploring Campaign Finance Data page, which gets us to another important point about what it means to work in the open, is that for us, one of the end goals, of course, is that we come out with more openness at the end. A bunch of our founders are from the Sunlight Foundation, and so government transparency, not just for us, but for the people we work with, continues to be a very important end goal. So once again, the point is not that it looks pretty, although my colleague Jen Thibault has done a lovely visual design. It's that we've actually managed to pull together a bunch of concepts that bunch of data that previously lived in disparate databases and unify them on a single page so that you as a member of the public don't have to search separately by the candidate and by the committee. Normal people, i.e. non-electoral financing nerds, see the candidate and the committee as fundamentally joined, and why wouldn't you? That's not how the FEC sees those entities, because that's not how they are regulatorily governed. So a big chunk of what we do is essentially trying to align the conceptual, the model of the databases with the conceptual model of the public and the conceptual models of the people running the agencies. And that, once again, getting back to the importance of lawyers and full stack bureaucrats, is the actual heart of what I do. I told Eric before I started that I had once sworn in 2003 that I would never do web design for a living, and here I am doing web design for a living, but that's because the web design isn't the point. The point is the underlying alignment work between various technical infrastructures, bureaucratic institutions, and the needs of the public. Here's another kind of fascinating piece of work we've done. These are micro-purchase auctions. So instead of doing federal contracting with these massive multi-year contracts that are worth millions of dollars, we have done the agile thing, taken individual user stories, and now auction them off to the lowest bidder. Our first go-round proved some of our core assumptions wrong. There's the famous case of the, if you look in the right-hand corner, the $1 bid that won, which was, okay, not a bad shock, but it was not really what we were looking for. We were looking for a living wage model of small tasks done for the federal government, not $1. But we set up the rules. It was totally legal. We played by them. And now we're trying to figure out how to iterate and make it different. Finally, if you talk about how we share things, this is we've made the United States draft web standards. The word draft turns out to be incredibly important here, because we're not telling anybody what to do with our web standards. We are just gently suggesting that it might help the American people have a sense of familiarity, comfort, and ease visiting various government websites that, yes, are run by different agencies, but to them seem like outreaches of the same central institution, the federal government, to just have the sites look a little bit more alike. Even though all of these sites, some of which we made, are perfectly functional, they look like they belong to entirely different institutions, which again matches the federal government's internal understanding of its structure, and from my own research, does not match at all what the public understands the federal government to be. It's not what I understood the federal government to be before I worked there. I understood the federal government to be a single unit, a singular government, and not what it actually is, which is a plurality of many different cantons and silos and empires and kingdoms that all basically work together but that are fundamentally separate, which is why you get things like this, which, you know, from a practice theory perspective, I would say seem very small, but actually represent really huge gaps in how we build these buttons, what people think about when they get them. Are they submitting? Are they logging in? Are they searching? What does the federal government look like, right? Like, is there a way that the law looks, is a question I ask myself a lot. Is there a way that the United States of America looks? We have tried to get there. This is what our standards now look like. We made a bunch of code you can copy. And we've also highlighted the accessibility issues, because that's another point. Accessibility to people of all abilities is really important. It is, again, mandated by law, but it's actually pretty hard to do. So we've tried to make the best thing the easiest thing, knowing that we are not the president. We are the General Services Administration, and we can't tell anybody in the federal government what to do. That is an important point here. We are not telling anybody what to do. Our website says use a little, use a lot, use it all. And then we are leaving it open to the agencies as to what they do with it. However, it seems to be working. Little by little, we are starting to see more consistency. So here are 3 websites that use elements of the standards. If we think about what the federal government looks like, my hope is that in 20 years, we will see a US government that looks a bit more like what we imagine a government would be, which is to say a single thing. Finally, I'm going to skim past this. We have a final outcome of our emphasis on openness and on change, which is influencing policy. So HTTPS only got mandated by the White House, which is very exciting because the White House, unlike 18F, can tell people in the federal government what to do. And so through long, patient argument and persuasive argument through rhetoric, we actually have managed to convince the federal government to mandate that federal websites protect the privacy of those visiting them. The other thing that we did, I'll point out, in the vein of making things to make change, is that we made a public dashboard to recognize which sites are doing it and which aren't. It's not an official enforcement mechanism. It's more like the web standards, a gentle suggestion. So what are we learning? One of the things that we're not talking about when it comes to participatory design in this talk is the sort of Scandinavian sense of participatory design as involving the people in the middle of the design process, bringing them in as co-partners. Rather, as I think you can tell from what I've said, I'm talking about various ways to bring in different kinds of people into design, into production, into writing code, into making visual design choices, for example. I like to use, when I think about operations like this, Sherry Arnstein's classic ladder of citizen participation. Again, there's a very small, hard-to-read citation down there. It's a paper from 1969. It's a classic. The most important thing I like about this, her point, is that it's not always the goal to move to full citizen control over all parts of the government. The point is to think thoughtfully and critically about where you need to be on that ladder and try to move up to the highest rung that you think is feasible. So, for example, with the EPA e-manifest project, which tracks hazardous waste as it moves across the United States, we have a Trello board. That's the informing rung. As one of the stakeholders wrote, I can check the board and see progress in real time without having to email back and forth with the folks who should be spending their time developing the system. Using Trello also makes it easy to see how individual tasks add together to further progress on the system overall. Again, I'm not endorsing Trello here, but what's interesting to me is the idea that we are building as we work an open portrait of the engineering itself. You can follow with this tool how the project in an agile fashion is coming together, which if you've ever worked agile is often very hard to see, and begin to figure out how these very small tasks, implement the front end, make the main template, are going to build up to something meaningful and usable in the end. The same thing with beta FEC.gov. We're telling you what's TBD. Again, it doesn't seem like such a big deal, but I keep emphasizing that this is really one of the first times a major agency in the federal government has done this, and nothing bad happened. The world did not end. It's okay. Small successes are what pave the way for greater commitments, which is how we've gotten to this form of consultation. I got a 404 when I went to the site looking for more information about Maria Cantwell. I hit the feedback button, and it sent me directly to, well, it didn't send me directly. I typed into a form, and then I hit the track the issue link, and then it turns out that I ended up on their primary repo. What I find interesting about this is the way that they've taken out the intermediary of the customer feedback tool and put in public feedback directly into the mechanism they use to manage coding. It's a very interesting direct kind of push into the day-to-day work of the people building financial disclosure data so that you can figure out who's paying for what. So here's a research question. How does participation in government-led open source efforts differ from non-state open source? I find that work is different in the government. Practices differ. Activities that I thought I understood in industry become very, very different when you subject them to continuous regulatory involvement. If there are people in the room who study open source collaboration, ask yourself, how is it different when the state gets involved? Another way that we're trying to open up the process is by greater geographic inclusion, which is to say that you can work from Mississippi, people do, from Albuquerque, from Austin, from all sorts of places. And that lets us reach out to a wider range of people. Our goal, which we are not even close to meeting, is a team that looks like America, which can mean many things depending on how you define America. But it is a lot easier to make a team that looks like America if you don't make people move from Austin. So one of the things that I find as someone who's done a lot of work in computer-supported collaborative work, or CSCW, is what is the lived experience of 100% distributed teams? What does this tell us about the blurring of work and home in the future, which has been a constant theme in CSCW research since the invention of distributed telework in the 80s? Another more interesting point, and possibly the most interesting point to me in this entire talk, is the notion of economic inclusion facilitated by the combination of reverse auction of small user stories for open source. So in this first auction, we had 16 bidders. Of those bidders, half were new to working with the federal government. At least 8 of the bidders were small businesses, including women-owned, minority-owned, and service-disabled, veteran-owned small businesses. This is a really different way of doing business than offering the multi-million-dollar contract to the firm that can afford to have a person on staff to only deal with government contracting. In our second round, all of the winning bids came from small businesses. This is a small pilot program, but we're demonstrably furthering one of the core aims of the federal government in general, which is to foster greater and more diverse participation in the workings of government. My question is, if I can get my slide to proceed, for those of you who study economics and the behaviors in auctions, what kinds of auction mechanisms should we try next? This is an interesting situation in which, unlike most auctions, we are not solely interested in furthering our own interests. It's a lot of interests. We want to maximize benefits for everyone participating. That includes the people who are doing the work. That's why the $1 bid, though kind of a nice novelty, is actually not what we want. We do not want the work to be done by the lowest possible bidder in this case, because a $1 bid for, okay, yes, possibly only 6 hours of work, but still is not feasible as a way to make a living. And our job, as we see it, is helping more people make a living. So, what are we making? Well, we're making ourselves more accountable to the public by making more things and aggressively oversharing about them. We're trying to make participation in design and development processes more inclusive through geographic distribution and breaking tasks down into smaller chunks that we can actually auction off to more people. And we're making organization organizational and cultural change by demonstrating that it is possible to do this. By starting with the very small steps in the open and just going one step at a time. Thank you.
So, good, some questions. Thank you, Liz.
I'm interested in the one thing you thought nobody would be interested in. What's the difference between 18F and digital services? Where do you divide yourselves up? To me, I work at Berkeley Lab, which is also a contractor to the US government, and I look to you guys for help because, like you, there's one of me for everything. I'm the designer, I'm the implementer, I'm the UX person, I do the content, I'm everything. So when I look at 18F and I look at digital services, I don't really understand what the difference is or what you do.
Imagine the traditional icon we draw for a government building, with the stairs and the pillars and the little hat roof on top. So 18F, as part of the General Services Administration, is kind of like the foundation. We're an infrastructure. I showed you a bunch of one-off projects because those are easiest to explain, but really what we try and do is create common components that can be reused across agencies or common platforms. Then, the hat that keeps the rain off is the US Digital Service at the White House. Because of the reach of the White House and the authority of the White House, they can also talk to all the different agencies, but they do so with greater authority to actually compel change. But they can't stay at those agencies. So what we also have in the middle, which I didn't really discuss, are in our ecosystem of friends, growing digital teams at the various agencies. So for example, you can imagine one at HHS or any of the other agencies that you might interact with, who are there to help that agency, again, build, buy, and share services better. I think I hope that answered your question.
What's the difference in permanency? Digital services will go away.
Oh, that. Nobody, so we at GSA are funded through 2018. There is no sign that we would ever go away. We're delivering, we are doing good work. At the White House, I would say that it will almost certainly be there. It might be in a different form. Right? It is an arm of the White House, and as the White House changes, so too would the digital service change, and that's the way it should be.
Oh, James.
Great talk. One of the things that struck me about a lot of this work is that, it's interesting that you're working in the government, and then you're putting out, that's interesting, and then you're putting out these sort of like prototypes almost, these kind of like unfinished works. But deploying them kind of like both from the government but at these massive scales. And how the question is sort of how this ties in with some of this like talk about speculation and fiction that's happening in design. And sort of it strikes me that some of this work could be speculative design or design fiction, but it's not because it's real, because the government is doing it. So I'm just sort of wondering if any of those kind of tensions play in with either your process or how you kind of imagine some of this stuff working. If that makes sense.
So I'll talk specifically about my process because, of course, I really like talking about speculative design, and so I use those ideas in my own work. So for example, at the moment, I'm doing a big project on identity and login. So what I've been doing is making what I call these North Stars of different models for service designs, and they represent very different futures. So I don't think of them as prototypes. I think of them as experienceable futures. I try and make them as real as possible. So unlike the sort of rough TBD prototypes you see there, which are intended to be an accurate-ish reflection of where we are in our official work, these are, ironically, more finished looking but much more tentative. I want to confront people with what it would be like to hit a government website that looks or acts a certain way. And so I need them to, yes, enter into that fictional world. So you've actually made me think of something really interesting, which is essentially the difference between fake speculation and real speculation. Well, the difference is in aiming towards transparency or towards accuracy. A lot of what we do is supposed to look unfinished because it is unfinished. And as we try out various experiments with micro-purchasing, for example, we're pretty clear that they're experiments, and sometimes they go wrong, and we try and lay out a kind of genealogy of our failed attempts in the past or where our attempts succeeded, versus my imaginary single sign-on scenarios which have no history, right? They come into the world as these totally faked up, pixel perfect, clickable demos, and then they're just going to disappear. If I don't, I mean, they'll be archived and I can talk about them, but they're not going to become production-ready software ever. That's not what they're for. Questions?
This has been a wonderful presentation. I want to say thank you. My question is in regards, are you looking at inclusive democratic processes that are happening in other countries? You did mention the Scandinavia model. I think Canada has been extremely progressive in this way. So can you speak to that? And can you, if you are looking at international models, can you distinguish something that would set the United States in its own vanguard?
That is such a great question. I really wanted to talk about this, and then I decided not to because I wasn't sure if we had time. So yes, the first answer is absolutely. The closest relationship is with the government digital service in the UK, and that's a very tight-knit relationship. We actually borrowed a bunch of their open source content and design for our own starter page when we got started. There are a bunch of personal connections in other governments, largely English-speaking ones, because that's most comfortable for us. And I would say, interestingly, they tend to be on a personal level. If you try to go to a federal government, I mean, imagine trying to figure out how you would get to me, Liz. Well, now we know each other, so you can always email me. But you wouldn't know how to find me to talk about this. And that's actually even the problem within the US government. I have no idea if I were to go to, say, the Danish government, how to find somebody who cares about the thing that I do. However, you had another part to your question, which is really which is deeply fascinating to me right now, which is the extent to which, let's call them information technology regimes or governance structures, mirror the governance structure of the country. So let's take the difference between the GDS in the UK and 18F in the US. So GDS the UK government is far more centralized than ours is, and so is GDS. They own content creation and website publishing for the entire government. They also have domain name control for the entire UK government, which is kind of a dream come true, right? Like, imagine being able to consolidate all of these various conflicting or redundant or confusing names with like a slash of a pen, and you can just make the ontologies perfect. It sounds so great. That is not how things work here. We're not just federalized in terms of even county, state, federal levels, but also, of course, within the federal government, we have all these different agencies. And unlike GDS, 18F can't boss anyone around. In fact, it's in some ways kind of the opposite. We're a consultancy. We have clients. We are not going to do anything that would violate our own sense of the best interests of the situation, but we also, of course, want to help our clients, which means that we are prone to being told what to do ourselves. I will say I have this long-term fascination with how, of course, Estonia does it, because that's yet another model. They're smaller. So one of the things that's interesting is, and please don't quote me on this, but I remember reading somewhere that the Estonian government was able to essentially create a policy that no piece of software can be older than 10 years, which sounds like forever in commercial time, but in government time is like a drop in the bucket. I cannot imagine trying to do that in the US. We are just too big, and there's just too much. We've been doing this for too long. You know, it's the first mover problem. There's just too much, you know, whenever you want to clear away the thickets of some thorny problem, you realize that the thickets are actually crucial interdependencies with vital systems, and if you clear them away, you will take down the whole edifice.
Okay, Bern, I just want to end, but you should come up and talk to her after, because we're
I'll
over
just stay
time.
here and talk more.
Yeah, so I want to thank everyone for coming. This has been great. I mean, this is a big theme here at CITRIS inside of the connected communities, and certainly a big community is the organization of governments and the relationship with citizens, and I'm just really, oh, you want to add something?
I have to add something really important. So this is us. This is the White House people, and this is the best kept awesome secret opportunity in the federal government for people at Berkeley, which is the social behavioral sciences thing. Anyway, they have a fellowship, which means that you could take a leave of absence, go to Washington, and do social and behavioral science research on government programs, including experiments.
Okay, wow, okay.
If I were not already employed,
This is
I'd be
truly
fine.
leaving us with a cliffhanger now, so excellent. So let's all thank Liz for coming. What a great...